Chinese President Xi Jinping has delivered a keynote speech via video link at the World Economic Forum's Davos Agenda on Monday. The Chinese president called for stepping up coordination on macroeconomic policy, abandoning ideological prejudices and promoting equal development for all countries. He also urged all countries to come together against global challenges and jointly create a better future for humanity. What are the specific proposals he has made, and how might these messages impact China and the world in the coming years? I'm pleased to be joined from Switzerland by Angelo Giuliano, a political and financial affairs analyst, and in our Beijing studio, Professor Liu Baocheng, Director of the Center for International Business Ethics at the University of International Business and Economics. Gentlemen, welcome to The Point. So it is very interesting. I noted that the topic of his speech is "Let the torch of multilateralism light up humanity's way forward." Professor Liu, why do you think President Xi want to highlight the importance of multilateralism at this particular juncture?
Well, it is really a critical juncture where the entire human species are standing on a crossroad. We see the light at the end of the tunnel for digital economy, and we are far better connected than never before in our history. But in the same time, we are facing two major problems. One is the health problem by the continued attack and resurgence of the coronavirus. And the other is the how can we really provide decent living for people with decent jobs during such a big recession, which is even worse than the financial crisis. And in addition, actually, the macroeconomic policy needs the re-engineering because so far almost every government is printing money to the market while productivity is not really resumed. So therefore, there can likely be a monetary race around the world. So therefore, President Xi particularly called on the G20 to have better coordination, to really to avoid begging the neighbor, to avoid sending the entire global economy into a deep recession, and this is really a very critical and crucial moment.
Mr. Giuliano, from an outsider's perspective, looking at the economic aftermath impact of the pandemic so far, really taking a very heavy toll around the globe, how do you look at the relevance of the topic of multilateralism as highlighted by President Xi?
I think for China, in the position of China as being the main producer for the world, is the manufacturing of the world, I think they're in a position where globalism is working well for them. If you look at the position of the USA, which has a trade deficit, especially a large trade deficit with China, they're in a much more difficult position. And this is why we had a personality like Trump coming into politics. It's because it's not sustainable for the US. They need to repatriate to bring back some jobs back in the US. So China will need to take into account the difficult position of the US, and especially right now, the US is printing a lot of dollars, and there's a huge risk, especially if we go into de-dollarization, there's a risk of a high inflation and a very hard landing for the US. So this is why it's a critical time to have a new renegotiation of the global currency. So we need to sit down, China needs to sit down, and all the G20 need to sit down and have a new Bretton Woods, because we cannot go on just printing money just out of thin air.
Basically, President Xi highlighted four major tasks that humanity is facing at this moment. And number one, he highlighted the importance of macroeconomic policy coordination under the framework of G20. But he also went on to highlight three other tasks, such as abandoning ideological prejudice, growth and prosperity for all countries, not just developed countries, not just developing countries, but for all, and the need for the global community to come together for a better future, meaning cooperation and coordination. Let's take a listen to what he said when it comes to abandoning ideological prejudice. Here's what he said.
Difference in itself is no cause for alarm. What does ring the alarm is arrogance, prejudice, and hatred. It is the attempt to impose hierarchy on human civilization, or to force one's own history, culture, and social system upon others. The right choice is for countries to pursue peaceful coexistence based on mutual respect and on expanding common ground while shelving differences, and to promote exchanges and mutual learning.
So, Professor Liu, high on the list of things to do, right, for the Chinese, from the Chinese perspective, is really this equality or diversity of different political systems and civilization or culture. Why do you think that is the case?
Well, if you really turned out robust, you needed one USB and one process. But human beings are really there to embrace diversity, and that's the beauty of being human being. So the different countries have different history, different footprint over their own revolutions, over their own evolutions, and that needs to be respected. And despite of the wealth gap, despite of different colors, so treat each other equally and reciprocate each other. That's the basic human principles. And the other is that only by respecting the other, you can really work together on an equal footing. So instead of imposing one stereotype, and as a matter of fact, in terms of political institution, in terms of economic model, there has never been a single stereotype, a single paradigm for them to follow. So we do have a shared future, but to go to that shared future, we need to find different ways that is really adaptive to the unique characteristic of that particular community, society, and country.
Mr. Giuliano, how do you read President Xi's message on this issue?
I think Chairman Xi wants harmony. I think it's important to understand Chinese culture and Chinese history. China is not the aspiration of hegemony and doesn't want to colonize the world. The first priority for China is to bring prosperity to its people and build a world of harmony. So now we have a clash of civilization here, is that you have the Western civilization, which is hegemonic, which is feeling superior and wants to export its model of democracy. And what we're seeing right now, especially with what happened in the U.S. with the Capitol riots, we can see that it's a failing model, and I think we're living in an hypocrisy where they appropriated themselves the word of democracy, which are just failed democracy. They are fake democracy run by elites. What China is showing the world is that they have their own system. They don't want to export the system. It's working extremely well, and it's based on the meritocracy. And it's in many ways it's much more democratic than most of the Western democracies. It's just that most people don't understand how it works.
Well, very important message, but this is going to take time, right, for countries, for communities around the world to take this message. But I believe the Chinese leadership will continue to promote that idea, which is shared by many Chinese people as well. If you see the kind of support that you have, this idea have within the Chinese community. Now, President Xi also proposed solutions to solving these major tasks. For instance, he talked about humanity's need to commit to openness and inclusiveness. He talked about upholding the international rule of law instead of safeguarding one's own supremacy. He also talked about the importance of consultation, cooperation instead of conflict and confrontation. And he also talked about keeping up with the times, not just for any particular country, but for human society, for the world as well. And in the part about upholding international rule of law, he had this to say. Let's take a look.
To build small circles or start a new Cold War, to reject, threaten, or intimidate others, to willfully impose decoupling, supply disruption, or sanctions, and to create isolation or estrangement will only push the world into division and even confrontation. We cannot tackle common challenges in a divided world, and confrontation will lead us to a dead end.
So there he mentioned this word code war, which is picked up by news agencies around the world. Basically, he also mentioned other wars such as Cold War, Hot War, Trade War, Tech War. So Professor Liu, what do you think is he trying to tell the world? What is China's position here?
Well, the world has enjoyed peace. Basically, on a broad basis since the end of the Second World War for so long time, simply because there has been a global governance by the rule of law. Although it requires a number of reforms, it's basically they're setting the foundation. And the rule of law is really a voluntary engagement from each of those countries, each of those sovereignties, instead of being imposed by or dictated by a certain country or by a certain Kazakh. So that's something that is very important because there has been a lot more finger pointing over the past years, and a lot of the politicians normally wanted to shift the problem they have faced or they have created onto others in order to avoid domestic complaint. And this is really a very short-sighted approach. You can fool people for a day, but not even for a month in today's environment. So therefore, being honest and being integral, and by working with the other in a faith-based manner, and this is something that we have to engage. And there has been a lot of protectionism going on. There has been a lot of bullying going on, and this is not really acceptable because we are living in the 21st century, and there is a general awakening of humanity, and that's something that we need to share.
Critics might say, well, is China, pushing back against all of the criticism, saying basically that it is totally innocent and everything has been levied on it, without basis? Or is China saying we don't want confrontation, whether it is hot or cold? If there are problems, we can sit down and negotiate. Mr. Giuliano, how did you take this message?
I agree very much with the professor here. I think it's very hypocritical what the US is doing. I live in Hong Kong most of the time, and I've experienced the meddling of the US in Hong Kong. So basically, we had interference of CIA, NED agents in Hong Kong. And also, we see what happened lately in Taiwan. Just National Endowment for Democracy, which is an extension of the CIA, just opened an office in Taipei. Those entities are used for toppling government and creating chaos. And additional to that, you have all the fake news about Xinjiang, about China, human rights, and so on. So there's a heavy bullying, and I think China is being treated unfairly. The problem is that China doesn't have access to, it's being censored. Alternative voices like, let's say, mine, are being censored on social media, Facebook and Twitter. So it's very hard for China to tell the world the truth because there's a censorship. And you see, it's not only about China censorship, it's also censorship in the US. They are censoring a president, and there are censorship. There's a heavy censorship right now on the leftist entities, people on the left. So I think it's very hypocritical and it's very unfair. There's a lack of knowledge of the West. And China doesn't have alternatives, doesn't have ways to spread the word about the reality. It's very hard to tell the truth.
So how does China propose, to solve the problem and to, in some people's words, to compete with other major countries? President Xi had also this to say. Let's take a listen to that.
It is important that we stick to the cooperation concept based on mutual benefit, say no to narrow-minded, selfish, beggar-thy-neighbor policies, and stop unilateral practice of keeping advantages in development all to oneself. Equal rights to development should be guaranteed for all countries to promote common development and prosperity. We should advocate fair competition, like competing with each other for excellence in a racing field, not beating each other on a wrestling arena.
Yeah, we're running out of time. Professor Liu, your take on this soundbite.
Well, I really like this analogy. You know, the people do need competition, but there has to be competition, and there has been a positive some competition instead of setting blockade or beating down or kill each other. So this competition promotes efficiency and hence common prosperity. So therefore, how the world can be really reset with the right type of governance in terms of the finance, economy, and the human value. And this is really something that the leaders and actually the entire human being need to rethink themselves as where is the past and where do we end up.
Okay, we have to leave it there. Time is up. I'm sure many different people have many different interpretations of President Xi's message, but these are his messages. Many thanks to Angelo Giuliano joining us from Switzerland and Professor Baocheng joining us here in the studio.